Did you know that Einstein's brain was stolen after he died? It's a true story. What? Gene Wilder took it? No, it really happened. The pathologist that went to do the autopsy basically walked in there, took out the brain, put it in a jar of formaldehyde, and took it home. Because he felt that a man of Einstein's genius might have some unique anatomy, and that this was something that belonged to science and all of humanity. Now, Einstein's family had not given permission for this to be done, and when Princeton Hospital called them to explain what had happened, they were not happy. But the pathologist pleaded with the family the case for this brain belonging to the scientific endeavor, and they shared with him what their true fear was. It wasn't that the brain would be analyzed. It was that their father would become a curiosity to which people flocked, and that he would be somewhat worshipped in a cult-like way, because at that point, he was a household name. He was a rock star of a scientist. I mean, how many scientists can you name today? He was pretty unique in the fact that pretty much everyone knew who he was. And they said, we don't want our father to be worshipped in that way, because what he stood for was the scientific endeavor, collaboration, seeking truth, a sense of wonder in the natural world, ingenuity. And so the pathologist promised that he wouldn't let that happen. In the 1950s, neuroscience was not terribly advanced, so he just kind of kept it in his house for a while. And in the 1970s, a journalist got wind of a rumor that this guy had stolen Einstein's brain. So he wanted to follow up on it. By this time, the pathologist had moved to Kansas. The journalist went knocking on his door to find out if, yes, this was true. And at this point, the pathologist said, you know, the field of neuroscience has advanced enough that I think we should do something about it. And he sent out segments of Einstein's brain around the world to laboratories that could do some analysis. And indeed, some unique anatomy was found and discoveries were made. But exactly what the family feared would happen, happened. When the studies started to be published, fans of Einstein started flocking to these laboratories, demanding to see the brain. Symbols are very powerful. They can inspire us, they can rally us around to actions that we didn't think we could accomplish together. But when symbols overtake the ideals and the values that they represent, it becomes a form of idol worship. For example, we parade around the sanctuary with the Torah every Shabbat morning, and people take their talit or their prayer books and they kiss the Torah. We are not worshiping the parchment and the velvet and the silver adornments, although they were made by skilled artisans and the Torah was written by a learned scribe. What we're showing reverence for is what the Torah represents, which is the Word of God. And by the way, that is one of the reasons I've stopped doing the procession with the Torah, because people had started taking their tzitzit to kiss me, and I appreciate the gesture. You can understand how I might find that troubling, as I am not really a symbol of God, right? I'm a person, and flawed at that. So in this week's Torah portion, we have another example of a symbol that ceased to be a symbol and became an object of worship. The Israelites were in the wilderness, they complained against God, and God sent a plague of serpents to attack them. They pleaded with Moses, Moses pleaded with God, and God said, here's what you need to do. You need to create a serpent out of copper, stick it up high on a pole, and everyone who has been bitten will look at the serpent and be healed. Torah scholar Jacob Milgram, he's a 20th century scholar, he explains what this is. It's something anthropologists call sympathetic magic, which is when we want to exert power over a particular person or group, we create a model and do a ritual around it. An example from ancient Egypt is when they wanted to go into a naval battle and defeat an enemy fleet, they would create a model of the fleet and then destroy it as a way of saying we're exerting power over our enemy's fleet. So with the copper serpent, what they were doing is saying we are exerting power and influence so that snake bites won't harm us. Now, the snake ended up being kept in the tabernacle and later on in the temple. It appears again in 2 Kings under the reign of Hezekiah. When Hezekiah ascended the throne in ancient Israel, he was dealing with a lot of idol worship in the kingdom, and he came sweeping through with measures that destroyed many symbols that people had begun to worship in place of God. And one of those symbols was this copper snake that Moses had created. And we're told in that second book of Kings in chapter 18 that he melted down the snake. The Talmud, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, goes on to affirm this story and says that the people had become confused. It wasn't that when they looked at the snake they were healed. It was that it caused them to raise their eyes to heaven and to bless God. Because our illness and our wellness are not in the hands of some totem, they're in the hands of our Creator. I heard the story about Einstein on a podcast called Radiolab, and the podcast ends by explaining that as great a genius as Einstein was, it wasn't just his powerful brain that caused him to succeed. He happened to be born and come to intellectual fruition in a time where the scientists before him had done all of the groundwork that he needed to break through in his understanding of how space and time really work. Not only that, not just the science, but science fiction writers and philosophers were part of his reading that gave him vision and flexibility in his thinking that caused him to think outside of the box. And finally, there's evidence in letters that Einstein wrote to his wife that she may have been part of his scientific team that helped him make these discoveries. She too was trained in physics, although once they started a family, she left the laboratory. So the point, the end of the podcast is saying, we can't make Einstein a god of science because he's a symbol. And what he stands for is the scientific endeavor, which is hard work and collaboration and daring to have a vision about how the natural world works. May we be blessed this week to understand that symbols can provide inspiration and something that causes us to come together as a community to do more work than we could as individuals. But may we always remember that symbols are just that, and never forget the true power and values that they represent. Shabbat Shalom.